What keeps happening? So the number on the bottom keeps getting bigger and bigger, and then which makes the fraction smaller and smaller. But that smaller and smaller never quite will get to 0, will it? Because we'll just take half times half and a half again and half. It still keeps getting smaller and smaller, but never quite gets to 0. Okay, so you have a new word, asymptote. This is how you pronounce it. He is silent. So it is a line which a function gets close to, but never reaches, or never does. It's close to, but never gets there. That is, so I'll tell you where this came from. I had a sub once and I came back and this is how the sub spelled it. And at first I'm like, oh my gosh, what did the sub think that was how it was spelled? But you know, I think it was actually that the sub was spelling it phonetically because that's how you pronounce it, is asymptote. Yeah. So that's why I wrote that up there. Okay, on to the first example. So we're going to use that today. So y equals 2 to the x, and we're going to graph this. And so how might we start? Because we don't know how to graph this, right? How might we start to figure out how to graph it? What might we do to organize some information? So can we do something to organize that? What will we do to organize that? Good. Yes, table. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So we're going to make a table. So I heard you say 0. And then what other numbers might we use for x's? And we're going to use the x's, right? Because it's so much easier to find the y once we put an x in there. What other numbers? 1. What else? 2. -1. -2. And then on this one, I'm just going to do a 3. I won't always go that far, but because it's our first one, we'll do that. So if we have 2 to the 1, I'm putting in a 1 in place of the x, what's 2 to the 1? 2. What about 2 to the exponent 2? 4. And I want a hand, please, for 2 to the 3rd. What would 2 to the 3rd be? Shereen? I'm sorry. Yes, 8. Thank you. So 2 times 2 times 2 or 8. What about 2 to the 0? A hand, please. Yes, Anais. That's correct. 1. So remember that exponent to the 0 is 1. I want you to think about this. I don't want you to just put it in the calculator. Think about it. So what is 2 to the -1? Anais? You're not sure? Okay, that's all right. It's 1/2. Remember that 2 to the -1 is 1 over 2 to the 1, or 1/2. So this is 1/2. So if it's a -2, what would that be? 1 over 2 squared, or 1/4. Does that make sense? Okay, so now we're going to graph those. 3, 8, 2, 4, 1, 2. So now on this y-axis, it goes by 2. So when I do 0, 1, I have to go halfway between the 0 and the 2. And then a -1 is 1/2, about like that. And then -2 is 1/9, even closer to that line. So over here, what's happening over here on the right? Is there going to be an arrow? What's the arrow going to do? It's going to keep on going. What's it going to do? It's going to go up, isn't it? It's getting. So that's our exponential graph there. But what's happening here? Getting smaller and smaller. Will it ever get to 0? It will never get to 0. So it's going to go like, this is how we draw it. It looks like when we draw it that it touches it, but it doesn't actually touch it. And it's just because it's really hard to draw it without and make it go close without touching it. But technically it does not touch it. So we've got a dotted line here that this graph approaches but never reaches. So that's called an asymptote. So that's our asymptote there. This is, think of it as a lava line, like there was lava coming down. The lava keeps coming down and down and down a little bit further. It slows down as it keeps going, but it never quite gets to 0. So what's the equation of that asymptote? This dotted line here that it approaches. I haven't had anybody yet today be able to name it. No. Horizontal line like this, right? What's the equation of a horizontal line? It's a y equals something. Y equals, and what is it? Y equals 0. That's right. Good. Wonderful. Good. So y equals 0 is that equation. Does that make sense? I know that's a little bit of a hard topic, concept. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. Where does this graph cross the y-axis? So can you give me a point for that? That's right, 0, 1. And so what is our domain? Is domain x values or is it y values? X values. So what would our domain be? So remember, we're looking at what's happening in this x direction, in the negative direction, and in the positive direction. So what's our domain? So over here, we go to, with the arrow telling us we're going to what? And what's that? Negative infinity. And this one, as it's going up, it's actually going in this direction as well. And it's just slower. So in the positive direction, it's also going towards infinity. So our domain is from negative infinity to infinity. Oh my God. Where should I go? Thank you. Negative infinity. And I'm just writing it in inequality notation because that's what I did on the homework assignment. What's our range? So the range is x values or y values? Y. So the y is up here. What's the range? Will the y value ever be 0? No. Greater than 0 or greater than or equal to 0? Greater than, because it never touches. Questions on that? Okay. No question, Jason? Okay. So increasing or decreasing? Increasing or decreasing, we start at the left and we're going to the right. What is the y value doing as we go from left to right? It's increasing. So this graph is called increasing. I have to write it over here. Okay, now we're going to do y equals 1/3 to the x. Let's make a table again. Okay, so let's start with the 1. What's 1/3 to the 1? 1/3. What about 1/3 squared? 1/9. So 1/3 times 1/3 or 1/9. What about 1/3 to the 0? 1. That's right. Okay, now here's the tricky one. 1/3 to the -1. Yeah, it's not negative. I know we always want to think of it as a negative, but so it's going to stay positive, but it's 1/1/3 because that's what that negative exponent means. Remember? And so how could we simplify 1/1/3? We multiply. So we multiply top and bottom by 3. So these 3's would cancel, right? And then this would give us 3 on the top. So it's just 3. So what did it do when we had that 1/1/3? What did it do to the 1/3? What did you just say, Zane? Or did you say something? That's okay. I'm sorry. Flipped it. That's right. It flipped it. Took the reciprocal. Made that 1/3 3. Okay. So now for the 1/9, when it's to the -2, what's it going to be? I mean, 1/1/9, which is 9. Okay, let's graph those. -2 9, -1 3, 0 1, 1 1/3, 2 1/9. So does this make sense that this keeps going up over here? Even though we didn't graph more points, it keeps going up. Does that make sense? And then here, what's happening here? This keeps getting, does it ever reach 0? No, it gets closer and closer to 0, but it never quite gets there. So we've got an asymptote. What is our asymptote that graph approaches? Y equals 0 again. Yep. Okay, what's our y-intercept on this one? Can we give it as a point? 0 1 domain. Yep. And then what's our range? Good. Does that make sense? Y is greater than 0. Hey, son, why is it not equal to 0? Why is it just greater than? Not greater than or equal to? If we keep getting bigger numbers here, or we get a -3, so put a 3 here, it's going to be 1/27, right? Which is not 0. And then if we put a 4, it's 1/81, still not 0. Does that make sense? So it keeps getting closer and closer, but never quite gets there. Okay, and then increasing or decreasing, again, as we go from left to right, what's happening to those y values? It's decreasing this time. Okay. Can I get somebody to help me pass out the worksheet?